I mean, you even said, I think earlier today, like something about being weird.
Oh, I'm sure I did.
And I was like, yeah, but you're weird like me. Like we're all
Right.
weird. We're all weird.
Yeah.
Like, and so instead of like the negative connotation of that you place on being awkward,
Yeah.
I was like, hey girl, you're weird just like me. And I love it. Like let's be
Yeah.
weird together.
Right.
And find more people that like being weird the way that we do. Welcome back to In Residence. I'm Keith.
And I'm Laura.
Hey, Laura.
Hey, Keith.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. What have you been up to and what are you thinking about?
What have I been up to? Feels like August is always a blur for me. Being in higher education, it is a tad bit of a busy month. So I was able to steal you away to go and have a date lunch, which was nice and fun. I got to spend some quality time with child 1 and child 2. We had a golf tournament that was rained out, but we went because they were raising money for a good cause and were able to participate in the raffle and some bingos. And child 2 won a quilt and child 1 won some Saints tickets, baseball team in St. Paul, Minnesota, minor league team.
AAA or something.
Oh, the games are so fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. Then I also got to get the kiddos to go out for supper with me because you were hanging out with a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of fun to go and take them to supper and hear what's on their minds. Gosh, they're goofy and fun. They're great. Great kids.
Yeah.
How about you? What's been up for you?
Same old with me, with the exception of getting to see a really good friend. We got to spend the majority of an afternoon and evening together, and I got to hang out with her and her family a little bit and connect and catch up. So that filled my cup. It was a lot of fun. A good reminder to make the time to make those connections. And then my normal weekly stuff, which is boring. the same old. But yeah, trying to interject more of the little magical interactions with people. And it's always fun and something I'm aiming for. So you had an idea for what to talk about, and why don't we get into that?
Sounds good. Last week, we had a really good conversation about change and transition. I like to listen to the podcast after you've gone through producing. And one thing that you said stood out to me. You said, I am lazy. And it caught me because it was one of those things where it's a story that I think you tell about yourself. And we talked about that a little bit of you say this about yourself, but I think I challenged you and said, well, actually, you're go, go, go. And you're like, yeah, You're right. I kind of am. But that script, that narrative keeps coming back for you. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about the stories that we tell ourselves and unpack that idea, because some stories we tell ourselves or scripts that are in our head are helpful and others may not be as helpful. I wanted to talk and explore that with you.
You messaged me earlier in the week, have an idea of what might be fun to talk about, the stories we tell ourselves. And so I was like, oh, interesting. I write that down. And funnily enough, I start thinking like just a list of kind of characteristics or feelings that lazy came up. But I'm also go, 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 like we talked about. It tended to be like maybe some negative things of like, oh, I'm hesitant or I'm standoffish. And then I'm like, well, but I'm also kind, I'm generous, I'm thoughtful, right? And I'm like, okay, there's kind of a dichotomy here. And then I'm just like, okay, I walked away and I was just thinking a little more. The idea of there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny and cute because I like that movie. It's an interesting way to frame it and think of my list that I had started writing. And some were good and some were bad. And then I walked away and then I was like, oh, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? The stories I tell myself, a mixture of all these things. What I focus on might help or hurt me moving forward is how I was thinking and wondering about this dichotomy between if I'm lazy and I'm go, go, go. These are kind of two extremes for me. And I don't want to be to the extreme. Like, what's the in between? Like that theme of that's where the magic happens in between these things. I don't know if it's so much I want to be this, not that. It's that I am sometimes this and I am sometimes that. And how am I going to make that useful for me? So those were my first thoughts and might inform some of our discussion. But what were you thinking when you messaged me?
I was thinking to really focus in on those stories we tell ourselves. Stories are powerful. I'm really intrigued with stories and storytelling. I know you are as well. They grab you, they grip you, they have you have some buy-in.
I always think of Elvis Costello's song, Every Day I Write the Book.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm a writer, or I like to write.
Right.
I mean, I grew up doing lots of creative writing courses and studied it. And then he's got a song that is like just a metaphor of every day you're writing the book of your life. This type of conversation is interesting to me, and thinking of like what chapter are we in? I just got an email from a group, Modern Elder Academy.
Okay.
It's Chip Conley, and it's this thing that they do out in like Baja, California, I think. And it's for modern elders, like midlife people like us, you know?
Yeah.
They even brought up becoming your own editor. I started swirling about this metaphor of I'm writing my own story. It's like, well, I also have the power to edit and decide what the next chapter is going to be. So that just all pops up in my head. So I get pretty energized or jazzed when we start talking about this stuff. So that popped in my head like as we were coming down to record. And so I'm like, Elvis Costello's got a cool song that I love. Other people are talking about this kind of stuff. And it really resonates with me because it's our story. And how are we going to tell it, or how are we going to develop it?
Right. The stories that we tell about ourselves, like you said, they're powerful. We have the ability to write that next chapter. And it made me think of a quote that I think connects, is by Henry Ford, the whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
If you think a story about yourself that is maybe good, or you think a story about yourself that is bad or ugly, and you're right, which path do you want to choose? And can you have some agency? And like you said, shifting that for yourself by shifting the story you tell.
Yeah. Because we have this inner critic and we have external critics too. And not all feedback is equal.
Yep.
What I tell myself in my head isn't necessarily true, and it's not necessarily useful either. I mean, that's a little bit like Derek Sivers' new book, Useful, Not True. Is this useful? Is it true? It could be one, it could be the other, it could be both. Paying attention to that, and the same with like external voices and things too. It's like they may not be coming to my story to help edit it with my best
interest in mind, or your best,
or they may not have like the empathy to show up for me, or offer me what is needed. It might not be helpful what they have to say. It might not even be useful. It might not feel helpful, but it might be useful. Like that's even harder, is like when something's bad, but maybe there's a little truth to it, and I need to be a little more discerning about not just shutting it down. It's like, ooh, that doesn't feel great, but maybe there's something there that's helpful. Anyway.
No, I think you're on the right track though. And not to like go down this like quote fest right now.
Yeah.
But one thing this morning I saw on probably, I think Instagram, right? You're smiling. I'm like, I'll just own it. I was on Instagram this morning. Here's what Gary Vee posted. 99% of people who judge you have no idea what's going on in your life. They don't know you. They only know a small percent of you. Even the 10 people closest to you don't know everything about you. They don't know everything that's going on in your mind or heart. They don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So please, when someone spits hate or criticism, remember, they honestly don't know you, and it's oftentimes a much bigger reflection on them than you. Gary. It was the same thing you're talking about, that 99% of the people that are giving you criticism don't know your lived life right now and what you're focused on.
Take everything with like a grain of salt, right?
Only you know what is true about you, what your story is. Yeah,
well, and it's good to exercise awareness and reflect and inspect the things that you think
Mm-hmm.
or that you think you know. Maybe accountability kind of even comes in.
It's a good point. Because if
And-
you're just in your own island,
Yeah.
doing your own thing without any reflection.
I mean, you might be a little delusional, right?
Yeah.
Like plus or minus, whatever that means. Like, am I stuck in a negative headspace, or am I out of my depth and I don't even know it, and everyone's rolling their eyes at me? And it would be maybe good for me to have some awareness of like, oh,
I am impacting other people.
yeah. Or I think I'm having an impact and everyone else is just like, oh, please just be quiet. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, Like, but it's not healthy to walk around thinking that people are thinking I don't know what I'm talking about, because then I'm going to be meek and not generous and not showing up.
Yeah.
Anyway, get us back on some track, or I don't know. I feel like just rambling.
Talking about stories about ourselves, one of the first steps is noticing or actually catching when one of those stories that you tell yourself is coming up. When I tell myself a story, I'm awkward. I'm an awkward person. When I notice that, even though we all got our own, flair, I have to really check in with myself and be like, okay, I guess this moves into the second phase pretty quickly of, is it true? How true is this? Is it helpful? So I kind of have to start unpacking. But the first step is always catching myself in the moment of those stories. I'm not always really good at it.
How soon can I notice that I'm doing that thing again? I might think, well, nobody really wants to hear what I have to say.
Right.
If I'm thinking that and feeling that, and then I'm withdrawing and I'm not sharing generously, then of course it's going to be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I don't show up, nobody's going to think that I'm missing,
Right.
And so then the faster I can notice that maybe I'm shying away from sharing something, I can shift into okay, why am I feeling this? Right. This is where we kind of get into some of the tools and things that we tend to talk about. Like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Like, just simply asking that.
Mm-hmm.
Just asking that alone for me can sometimes be like a step forward. And like, okay, well, maybe instead of saying exactly the thing that I'm afraid to say, how could I maybe say it a little differently?
So going back to my example of why I wanted to talk today, you were just kind of going and you're like, oh, and I'm lazy on the last podcast.
Yeah.
And I don't think you caught it until I was like, hold on, you're actually, or did you catch it? Maybe you did.
I caught myself kind of not being nice to myself by calling me that.
Yeah.
Because it feeds into my inability to relax. Because even when I'm relaxing, I'm thinking of, I could be doing something productive.
You do say that a lot.
And I know it's kind of a catch-22 of, well, if I did the chore, I wouldn't be thinking of it while I was trying to relax. And so I get in kind of this loop where I can't win, and I need to stop that loop by inspecting why I'm having the thought and then deciding, what am I going to do about it? And so I noticed I said something that wasn't kind to myself. Well, that's not a great story to tell myself. How am I going to not be that if I constantly tell myself that? I think I even threw in like lackadaisical. That's a little more kind. And that to me signifies like, oh, what I'm really wanting for myself is to have more intention, to have more focus, and to own what I want, and to be the kind of person that decides they're going to go for something. So I want to be the kind of person, like with what I was saying was, I want to be the kind of person that shows up and shares, not to say, hey, here I am, everybody pay attention to me. It's like, no, sharing generously means I have this idea, I'm going to share it. Is it helpful for you? What do you think of it? Maybe this was helpful for you because I'm thinking of it too. Let's have a conversation. Being able to go from, I feel lazy and nobody wants to hear from me, to all of a sudden like, oh, I can show up and I can help others. That pivot between where I was and the kind of person I want to be, that's the magic of the in between those two things. It takes some work So I went from I'm lazy to, oh, I'm lackadaisical. And then I get to the point of, well, it's actually unfair of me to think that about myself, because think of all the people I could help if I simply show up and share a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it just ripples.
The way you're talking through it is similar to like my one example. I have a list here, but the one example, just to stick with it, I am awkward. That's not very nice to myself necessarily. It is fed by anxiety and
I think
pressure and right.
You even said, I think earlier today, like something about being weird.
Oh, I'm sure I did.
And I was like, yeah, but you're weird like me. Like we're all weird. We're all weird.
Yeah.
Like, and so instead of like the negative connotation of that you place on being awkward, I was like, hey girl, you're weird just like me. And I love it. Like let's be weird together.
Right.
And find more people that like being weird the way that we do.
So like that's like a small shift, right? To like move up to that. I don't know what that future story could be that is further in the distance. That's almost hard to even believe. Those small shifts really do help you get into a different set that's more beneficial. I forgot that you said, yeah, you're weird, just like me, and I love it. Even the I am awkward, shifting it to I'm willing to believe that I am not as awkward as I feel right now. Something like that, even to just shift a little and say, I'm quirky, not awkward. That feels better to me, that there's a benefit to being unique, that there's those things don't worry. I'm not just sitting around being like, oh, I'm awkward, like all the time.
Right.
It's one of those things that it's something that I catch. And it's like you said, well, that's not very nice.
Yeah. That's not helpful.
That's not exactly helpful.
I mean, it's helpful in keeping me where I am. It's not helping me get to where I want to go. Like you were saying, is like what our aim is, recalibrating as we go. And when we find a road closure, we find an alternative route, right? And so all these little recalibrations, I mean, that's what we're doing, right? Because if we can set our intention, have an aim of where we want to go, and hold that, even when we get the self-doubt or the soundtracks, as John Acuff would say, like they're not the soundtracks that are helping us.
Yeah.
We're going to create a new mixtape. We're going to get a new soundtrack to help us move forward, right? It's not like a snap of the fingers and you're there. It's a process to go from calling myself lazy to maybe lackadaisical to, if I can get over that little hurdle, I can help people. That's probably years of progress. It's taken time and patience and, to keep moving forward. It didn't happen overnight. It takes attention and awareness, and some reflection is really helpful, as I've been wont to note.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about The Secret.
Okay.
A little bit.
Okay.
And about vision boards and manifesting and putting things into the universe. And I know it's connected, I promise. But the reason I'm thinking about it is because there is a really strong theme about figuring out what is it that you want your life to be, and spend time really detailing what it is or what you want, and then spend time each day trying to connect to the feeling of being that. And in a way, I feel a little bit like being able to decide what you want and to choose how you tell yourself that maybe connects.
Let me know if what you're saying aligns with this email I got this morning from the Modern Elder Academy.
Okay.
Which I'm on their newsletter, and this is like a newer one. It just came out. It's like the Wisdom Weekly. It's like the first one they did of these. And they have some questions in there that, I mean, go check this place out if you want. Like, it's not sponsored or anything, but I think these questions are super helpful and sound kind of like what you're saying. They say, if you're feeling stuck or directionless and thinking about turning the page and starting a fresh chapter, right? Like it's a story thing. It was
Right.
really interesting. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
they're talking about telling stories too. Maybe it's time to take out the red pen and do some strategic slashing. Like you can be your own editor, right? Like I was saying,
Yep.
and they're like, ask yourself, what's no longer as fun as it used to be?
Okay.
What identities no longer fit me? What stories am I ready to turn the page on?
Ooh.
What habits or behaviors do I need to change? And then in bold, it goes, and what am I ready to let go of in pursuit of a better second half of life? I feel like that is very synchronous with what you're thinking and kind of what you're getting at.
It actually takes a lot of, it goes beyond, cutting things out of a magazine, putting them on a vision board and saying, okay, this is where I'm headed and spending time with that each day. I think that can be powerful, if that's helpful for you.
I think they're fun exercises.
I actually think they're fun too. But if it's not helpful for you, that's okay too.
Yeah.
I think this gives you more of a roadmap to help you clarify those things.
I think questions are very helpful, tiny actions that lead to you answering them, which is another small action that leads to more action. And it helps you discover a little more, getting it down on the page or typing it out, whatever's useful for you. It just comes back to how helpful writing is for me to not just ask in my head, but to put it down out of my head.
Right.
That practice really helps move me along because it's like shifting my perspective. Reading it back to myself once it's out of my head is a different perspective than thinking about it on a loop even. It interrupts my overthinking and shifts me into a different analytical state or something. There's something there about, like, I'm really interested in how getting out of my head, whether it's a voice memo or writing, longhand or typing, it interrupts a pattern, that overthinking loop, which it's like a roundabout. We'll mix in a road metaphor, right? How do I get out of that so that I keep writing the next paragraph?
You're, I'm sorry.
Mix of metaphors.
No, thinking about a roundabout, you may roll your eyes at this, but I'm going to say it anyway, because as we've established, I'm a little weird. What? I'm taking it back. So growing up,
Story time.
No, well, yeah. It's not that long of a story, but growing up, my dad loved Chevy Chase movies. I know.
I'm rolling my eyes.
We always watched European Vacation. It reminds me of going around that roundabout when they're like, oh, Big Ben, Parliament, right? And so they just keep going around Big Ben, Parliament, because they can't quite get out of it, that constant loop. And not just because you don't know how to get off, but you're just blocked.
Or not sure which way to go. What turn do I take?
Exactly. The idea of spending intentional time to be clear about what story you want to reflect who you are and what your life is. To take that sort of time, like the questions you asked, maybe if you're not happy or excited about where you are right now and the story that you're telling yourself, you have the ability to be the author of your life.
And what kind of author do you want to be?
Exactly.
Remembering that you have agency.
Mm-hmm.
You bring that up often, which is super helpful because I forget that I can be the change agent in my life if I simply decide and show up and take the steps to do that. You brought it up this morning, and I wrote in my notebook yesterday when I was listening to some stuff that agency is greater than anxiety. And that's a story I want to tell myself. And that's the kind of author I want to be, is the author that writes something like that.
Agency is greater than anxiety.
That can be really hard, don't get me wrong, but for something helpful to tell myself, to help me push through and to do the work, that can be pretty powerful, right?
I think so, because really at the core, agency is letting yourself say, hey, you have the option to choose and you do have power. Sometimes we can let anxiety take over and tell you all the reasons why the story you want to write or the decisions you want to make are not good enough, ambitious enough. They aren't fill in the blank enough. So remembering that you have agency, being the author of your own story is agency, right? It's saying you have the pen, the paper, you're the one that's creating it. You're the one that's writing that next chapter, deciding what scripts are there, what you tell yourself.
I'm reminded of the quote you have up, everything you're doing is working.
I like that.
Because it's true. It might not be giving you the outcome you want. And so having the awareness to identify when it is and isn't working, or my actions are leading to something I don't want. Like if you're stuck, do you know what you do to remind yourself that you have agency and that you can choose the actions and the things that you're going to do to switch it to getting back to where you want to go?
One thing that I do, if I'm not getting to where I want to go and I feel stuck, I come back to journaling. It's that self-reflection. I do a lot of journaling because what I'm trying to discover isn't necessarily like writing down, today I did this and it didn't go well because of XYZ. Like I might do that, but what I'm really trying to do is try and download from my own brain, not necessarily what went wrong. That's the process I need to go through to get to it. But what is the underlying story and belief about myself that keeps tripping me up?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that is really to the core of it. And I don't know if I've been that clear about it before, but I think I'm always trying to get to the story is, who am I to add to the conversation? Or who am I to post something on Facebook because it's going to be awkward. So it's always those I am statements that come at the core of the things I'm trying to work through and shift. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was writing to explore this topic, a question I wrote down to ask myself, can we push past the ugly to understand the good and the bad on the way to better? And the question we ask ourselves, like the who am I, those limiting things that feels ugly to me.
Right.
If we can push past that and get into the awareness and reflection of, was it good, was it bad? Using these tools, like you said, journaling, reflection, gaining the awareness, implement grace and compassion with yourself or with others.
Yeah.
And then I was like, ooh, a tool that I seldom use that I'm trying to, because we did a podcast about it, celebration.
Yeah, that's important.
And then creating white space. The opposite of that is laziness, where, okay, having downtime and feeling unproductive, how about I scheduled space for me to have time to breathe, right? Like that's a tool. You were talking about having an aim, like what are your goals? What are your, having intention with going after them, your focus, all these tactics and strategies that come up and up again. I think they work in so many different ways, in so many different arenas, whether it's work or home and all these things. But is it really as simple as, hey, take some time to reflect, slow down a little bit so that you have time to think about why isn't this working? Or better yet, why is this working? Hey, how about we focus on what's working sometimes, right? I'm talking about it right now and I'm like, is it really this simple? But it's not. When you're in it, when you're on the train that's going 100 miles an hour and you're wanting to pivot and get off at that stop, but they're not stopping at that one because this is a direct line. Like when we're in a situation where it feels like that, and then you're like, okay, so now I have to have patience and wait till I get to the destination so that I can go back. And then you feel guilt and, oh, I made the wrong decision and all these things that they build up. And you don't know it all. You just feel bad.
Right.
And then you get this ugly voice in your head. Oh, you didn't do the right thing. You should have known better. All these shoulds, right? The shady Keith starts talking.
Keith. Yep.
What can I do to not sit in the bad? You know, okay, that's right. I can rewrite the script, like you said. I can choose the next decision I'm going to make and reclaim that agency of like, yeah, I took the long way, but I'm going to make it better. I feel like I'm rambling a whole bunch, but these little things are connecting in my head and I'm excited about it. I'm going down lots of like tangential roads here.
No, but one thing that came up for me, and I think this connects, if we're talking about journaling, and is journaling enough to get there? Or self-reflection, is that enough to get there? And if it was, I think I would have arrived at the number of pages I've journaled.
Right.
So I don't think so.
So the next step is kind of like support network, community,
Well,
right? Or what?
I think so. I mean, I kind of go back to that first step that it seems almost too easy that you just somewhat gloss over it. When you know what your stories about yourself are and you hear something come up, it's kind of calling yourself on it. It's noticing when I think, oh, who am I to post on social?
Which you did.
I did actually yesterday. I'll talk about that a little bit. Does that sound good? Okay, story time with Laura. When we started the podcast, I was nervous about being seen, about sharing too widely, because I thought, who am I to have a podcast? Who am I to talk about things and have people actually listen? Who am I, ... I said to Keith, well, let's not post it anywhere. Let's just release it, I think, right? So It did take a couple of weeks before it's like, well, you can post things, but I won't.
You let me start sharing it in certain spaces online. And I don't know if you did until yesterday, really, very much.
Oh, I didn't acknowledge it at all on my own account.
Most of your feeds, yeah.
None of them.
Yeah.
No.
It's been almost a year since we started publishing.
So at the beginning, I did tell you, I said, well, when we get to episode 20.
It was like 10 at first. And then it turned to 20.
Then it was 20 and like maybe at 1 year.
Oh, you didn't share that with me.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, that was my own internal.
Yeah.
Maybe after a year, if we're still doing this thing, I'll put something out there. So yesterday, we had just talked about change and transition and butterflies and caterpillars and a lot on last week's episode. And I got down to my garden and there were 4 or 5 caterpillars on one dill plant in my garden. I was setting up the sprinkler and I looked at it and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. And all I could think about was our podcast episode. And I often post, if I post at all, pictures of being outdoors or, being in the woods. And so I thought, well, I'll post this to Facebook and I can talk about how caterpillars turn into butterflies. I'm like, gosh darn it, this is a nudge, Laura. You ought to put this on Facebook and do it in your own way. You don't have to put up the thumbnails Keith makes. You can put a picture that resonates with you and just say, hey, we talked about this on our podcast this week. And then be your awkward self. Just lean into it and own it and say, yeah, we have a podcast. I've been a little shy to share about it because that's true. And I put it out there for the world to see.
Your world.
My world, my network.
The people that are connected with you.
And whoever I show up in their algorithm. Probably way fewer than I think.
Yeah.
I'm not that active on social. But for me, that was a big step. And I think for social, the reason I don't post is because of those stories I tell myself. I don't have things to say. You know that's not true.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm a talker. You're very talkative. Tell somebody else your stories.
But I'm an overthinker.
Give me some white space.
Right. I'm an overthinker, though.
Yeah, we both are.
We both are.
Just in our own ways.
In our own ways. So I guess some of working through it can't be just journaling. Some of it is, what are some of those small steps to help you work towards what it is you're doing and either affirm the positive stories you have about yourself that support your journey or challenge and chip away at those not so helpful stories that you tell yourself.
So the modern elder email, what stories am I ready to turn the page on? And then what habits and behaviors do I need to change? What that really brings up for me, like when you're talking about taking that step of sharing and showing up. Hey, this is what I've been up to. And I was just talking about this on a podcast that I make, by the way, sharing that it's generous. In that script, the concept of sharing generously, and if you don't, it's like stealing. That was from, remember Seth Godin's book, Poke the Box? One of the biggest things that helped me shift to being more open to being seen because I was the same with you. I'm like, I'm very uncertain about how I'm going to feel about the tiny little spotlight I'm going to shine on myself. We think, oh, everyone's going to know and see, and how are we going to be vulnerable? And it's like, in reality, it's like the network that we've created, like our own little silo in these little social media things, are who's really going to see us at first, right? Hopefully it grows, because when I shift from I'm afraid I might not come across well, or people might have a comment or a critique that might hurt my feelings, to, well, if I show up and I share something that can help another person, that makes it worth it. And me growing in my ability to vocalize what I'm thinking or feeling is helping me too. And so it's mutually beneficial, and everybody else has the option to not listen.
Right.
But if I choose to not show up and find a way to share, I've taken that option away from them. I've taken a bunch of options away from myself. I'm limiting the possibility. And I think, really turned the page on undoing that to myself, and more of creating opportunities and creating possibility. It can still feel scary, even if you've done it for a long time. But the more you do it, the easier it gets.
What I'm trying to shift, and it's a work in progress, but maybe the story I'm trying to shift, I'm awkward, and so who am I to do this? Who would ever want to listen to me? To maybe a thought of, I am someone that is vulnerable, so I can help other people navigate their lives like I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And we all have our own quirks, and that's amazing. I think that's where I've been kind of trying to shift. And I think that this project and this work that we're doing together is helping me do that.
It's helping me as well.
I like what we're doing, and I like that I'm doing it with you. Even though it's scary, we're doing it anyway. But it's not 100% scary. Just maybe 5% scary, 2% terrifying, and the rest is bliss.
Oh, wow. You're very generous with that breakdown. We operate on different spectrums, I think.
How would you rate it?
Oh, I don't know. There's more scared on my pie chart, I think. I mean, even we're talking about being seen, and I think it's so silly that I've been working on, let's do video, and yet it still hasn't happened.
Maybe our 1 year.
Yeah. Ooh,
that's probably not helpful, though, to be like, let's put a lot of pressure on ourselves.
No, that's not pressure. That's setting an aim.
Is it? Okay.
And the deadlines can be helpful. I'm really bad with deadlines, and I feel the weight of them. But that's another script I want to flip. How can I hold myself accountable and be more productive in a healthy manner to get the things done that are truly important by holding myself accountable, is basically all I'm trying to say.
It's funny. Your story about deadlines and mine is I'm deadline driven and I get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting how that shapes our perceptions of how we navigate.
Yeah. It's so daunting for me, especially when it's a self-imposed thing, or has a lot of wiggle room where there's uncertainty of how it's going to get accomplished before the deadline.
Yeah.
That's something I really need to work on. So anyway, we can ramble more about that another time.
Sounds good.
I guess we're talking a lot about introspection and self-reflection, noticing ourselves doing when things pop up, and journaling. It's a solo thing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to glance over the fact that you and I are both very fortunate to have each other as a support, because we've developed trust in our relationship over a long period of time, and that allows us to be really vulnerable and open, and that allows us to help each other. And to me, it's a signal that as we're going forward and we're working on ideas and concepts that are going to help us have a better life, right? We're working through some complex relationship type stuff in in all of the things that make up our life, right? And that in between. So for me, I'm lazy and I'm an achiever. And in between those two things, it's complex and it's hard. And I have you to help me go between.
Yeah.
I think what I'm realizing is that as we're building this thing, what would a community of people like us, people that are weird like us, that are looking to level up in the way that we are, or similarly, having a support system and community is important. So now I'm just going to kind of maybe be thinking about how can we help others have community or some support that's not all the weight on your own shoulders. I kind of want to solve for that and help people that need that. Is there a better way of saying that?
I think you're saying it really well. And I like that idea, because how many times when I journal, especially on the weekends, after I'm done journaling and doing my morning routine, I come up, you haven't even had a sip of coffee yet.
Yeah.
So I have some stuff I want to talk about that I journaled about. I think I've gotten some things figured out. And you always help me be heard, but then also say, oh, have you also thought about this? That's interesting. This is something that I've also been thinking about. And so to have a good network and relationship with you to do that helps move towards where I want to go,
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is that you want to create that sort of, not like somewhere where we create a community where people just sit and give each other advice on their journal entries or anything, but you're trying to create a community where people can show up and work through their journey as they're going towards what it is they really want in life, in relationships, in really living your life and doing the things you love.
Something to explore, I think.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Anything else?
I don't think so.
Do you have any recommendations?
Yes. I'll give you one recommendation. So it's a book by Kindra Hall called Choose Your Story, Change Your Life. It's one that I listened to a while ago, but it is really relevant with today's topic. It's all about how to silence your inner critic and really rewrite the story of your life in the way that you want to live it.
I think you told me there's a book that we definitely don't have time to read or listen to before we record, but it's a good one. I'm like, oh, okay.
It's really helpful because Kindra Hall focuses on the power of storytelling. In her books, her keynotes, she is amazing on Instagram in particular and uses those storytelling tools. So if you are interested in that, she's great to follow. She also has books of leveraging storytelling in business, which are also fantastic. How about you, Keith? What are your recommendations?
I've been re-listening to Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I was like, I'm not really listening to things that lend themselves to things that we tend to talk about here. But then I realized, no, I listen to things and then that informs what I want to talk about usually. This book in particular, it's got a lot of nostalgia for the 80s and the pop culture of that time and all kinds of things. And it's a dystopian, futuristic, but not too distant future story about basically a metaverse. People putting on goggles and fading away into a virtual simulation, right? The nostalgia part is really great. But what I was thinking of when we're prepping for today's talk, nostalgia can be great, but it can also be something that I get stuck in and stops me from moving forward. And it's kind of like what's happening in this book a little bit. People are tuning out what's happening in the world around them and getting sucked into this virtual world. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Something for me to I'll maybe think about it a little more. And I've just been re-listening to it for fun and having a good time. But it kind of relates to the stories we tell ourselves because the characters in this story are subscribing to certain stories and they're shunning others, thinking about, is it useful? Is it helpful? Big question mark there. It's fun. If you're into quirky sci-fi, 80s pop culture type stuff, like if you're a nerd like me and you're into music and things, it references all this kinds of 80s stuff. So it's fun. I'm enjoying it. I've listened to it probably a couple times.
Sounds fun.
It's a good listen. Will Wheaton does the narration.
Ooh.
So he's
like that.
He's got a good presentation. All right. Let's get out of here.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you.
I love you. Agency is greater than anxiety.